What's up, team? Sean from Rest to Live here. And today we're not talking about medicine. We're not talking about good pills. We're talking about poison pills. I think there's a lot of confusion around what a poison pill is, how it's used to thwart hostile takeovers of a company, and also some of the disadvantages for current shareholders. And one of the reasons why it's often so important to vote the shares you have, make sure your voice is heard. So let's not waste any time. We're going to jump right in today. This is an informative session. So what's really kicking this off is, I think as many of us know, recently Elon Musk put forward a proposal to buy Twitter at a price of $43 billion all in. And shortly thereafter, Twitter's board adopted a poison pill. Now, this sounds very dramatic, and it's meant to, right? It's meant to be a very serious move that stops, a potential hostile takeover from happening. So let's give you really the key factors of what happened here, right? So very recently, within the past couple of days, Twitter adopted what's known as a limited duration shareholder rights plan. And this is, again, the real terminology for what we're calling a poison pill, right after that Elon Musk offered to buy the company. So this is what we know. And typically these moves are really, really common ways that boards will react very quickly to either slow down, put a stop to, or create some sort of a hurdle to getting a hostile takeover. And the key underlying factor here is that it dilutes the stake of the entity eyeing the takeover. Okay, so this is important to understand. And this was a unanimous board vote, so I want to call that out. So before we talk any more about this, let's get into the basics of what this actually means. I think it's very, very important, right? So let's start here, and we're going to start really basic. When you hear the word poison pill in regards to any kind of a corporate takeover, mergers and acquisitions, corporate boards, the way they're protecting against hostile moves on them, this is where you start to hear terms like poison pills. In its most basic 101 level understanding, it's a defensive strategy or tactic that's used by the firm being targeted, so in this case Twitter, to prevent or basically make it much more difficult to stop a potential hostile takeover. And this would be in this case by Elon or whatever the conglomerate aggregation of funds he's going to have here. And again, in the most basic way to think about this is what Twitter's trying to do is make themselves as a company appear to be much less attractive, much less profitable for that potential acquirer. So here's the reality, right? They're actually pretty darn effective because it's a really simple way for the board to put up a major, expensive, time-consuming hurdle in front of a potential acquirer that will oftentimes make them think like it's either not worth pursuing this at this point, and also it's a good way to create change internally as well. That might be something they want to do. So again, 3 points, super easy. It's a defensive tactic utilized by a target company that will stop a hostile takeover from happening or at a minimum slow it down. It allows existing shareholders the right to purchase additional shares at a discount. And what this does is it creates a diluting effect of the ownership of a new hostile party. I think there's a lot of confusion here on dilution. The idea of a poison pill with this sort of a play is not to dilute current shareholders. It's to make it much more expensive and less attractive for, in this case, Elon Musk and whoever else is coming in with him. There's two typical strategies that we see with poison pills. And this is pretty well known in the business, so I'll cover them quickly. I don't want to go too deep into it. The flip in and flip over strategies, okay? So let's even bring this back just a bit here, okay? I want to give you guys some history on this. I think that first section was the quick pieces, right? Current shareholders, in theory, should not see major dilution here. This will be very tough from the acquirer, in this case, Elon Musk, from doing anything. If you want to learn a little bit more about how this works and the specifics, now keep listening, but otherwise, those were the basics. So look, the reality is in the world we live in, takeovers happen all the time. They're friendly, sometimes they're hostile, sometimes they're acquisitions, sometimes they're mergers, okay? So this tactic is not new. It's been around since the 1980s. And essentially, it was a way to get creative to stop hostile takeovers from happening, right? So the poison pill strategy, again, creates these hurdles that make it either more expensive or less attractive to make this play. This is what we understand. Here's the piece that you need to understand if you currently own Twitter shares. This particular action protects minority shareholders and avoids the change of control of company management. I want to say that again. The reason the board does this is not to hurt current shareholders. It's to halt the acquirer from gaining enough shares to take over the company. But at the same time, they have a fiduciary responsibility to current shareholders, oftentimes minority shareholders, right? The folks that don't own many shares, but own some, right? There are ways as well to have this create an effect where now the purchase price has to be much higher. So Elon's bid is not going to be enough, right? Maybe 43 billion doesn't get it done now because of the poison pill. Maybe it's 60 billion or 70 billion or whatever the case might be. Now, there are some things to be really aware of here from the standpoint of disadvantages that can come up during this process of essentially launching a poison pill, right? Now, here's the other thing. Before I jump into these disadvantages, personally, I like to see these things go to a vote to shareholders to say whether or not they're going to do this. This is typically what we see as like a proxy battle where both sides will try to pitch their case to the shareholders. If you're a current shareholder and this does go to a voting or to a proxy vote, what you're going to expect is you're going to start getting mail or outreach from both sides explaining why, in Twitter's case, they're saying we shouldn't be acquired. Here's why. We've got a great board. Here's the direction we're going. We're way undervalued. On Musk's side of the house, you're going to get information around why he's going to create change and do great things and release value to the shareholders, right? So I don't care which one you agree with. Expect to see both if a proxy battle does ensue. And I have to be honest with you, I'd be pretty surprised if it didn't, to be frank. But let's talk about some of these major potential disadvantages. I want to call this out because these can be really big, right? Stock values do become limited. So shareholders often have to purchase new shares just to keep even. Now, in this case, what they're doing is a discounted version within the poison pill. It's a short duration play from what I understand about it right now. So this may not be an issue in the near term, but something to be aware of that this could potentially, that's the key word, potentially could happen, right? The other issue here is that institutional investors, the big players, the major players, the big ETFs and index funds, this really discourages them from buying more because now they have to be constantly aware of the fact that these aggressive defensive tactics are already in place. And at any given time, they can be affected by these poison pills that get released, which creates more volatility and risk within their portfolios that they often manage in a passive way. Now, additionally, one of the bigger concerns here as a shareholder, and so think about this not from the standpoint of Elon or from Twitter, you and me, small shareholders, we don't own much, we've got some money tied up in it perhaps. Sometimes the problem with the poison pill is it actually lets really bad managers and leaders make it through, and those are the people that were being targeted to be removed anyways. So oftentimes what can appear to be a defensive tactic to keep the company and keep its value within its current shareholders, a lot of times they're just protecting themselves. So I'm not saying that that's the case here, but keep that in mind. If you feel like Twitter is undervalued, you don't understand where they're going, the revenue doesn't make sense, you don't see the potential here, well, maybe you should be a little bit upset here that this happened because you want to unlock more value as a shareholder. So keep that in mind. And one of the reasons I bring this up specifically, and this isn't necessarily the case with such a big firm like Twitter, but in general, when venture capitalists or PE firms buy into companies, especially in a hostile way, it's because they need to force people off the board or force new leadership into the company. Now, let's go a little bit different, right? There's essentially two types of these, as I already mentioned. There is a flip in and a flip over, okay? The variety of which is really more so the flip in, but I want to call it out either way. So let's just talk about this for a second as well. A flip in poison pill strategy is when shareholders, excluding the acquirer, so again, in this case, Elon, can purchase additional shares at a discount, right? So in purchasing these additional shares, those current shareholders have instantaneous profits, right? So I'm gonna give you a really, really basic example. Let's just say the shares right now are at $40 a piece. And I'm just using made up numbers here. I now am saying to you, hey, John and Jane shareholder, we're gonna let you buy shares for $30. You're instantly going to get that $10 increased valuation the minute they switch over to your account. So this is one way to think about it, to not have dilution in the current shareholder base while still offering an incentive to buy more shares, which in theory is going to help to raise that market cap and make it not as attractive now for that acquirer, right? So this is a right to purchase that's given to shareholders before the takeover gets finalized, and it gets triggered per this poison pill when the acquirer amasses a certain threshold of the company. I think I saw something around 15%, but just to call it out, that's usually the way they do it. It's some particular percentage of the company. Okay, so the other way to think about this as well is these new shares are going to hit the market, right? The value of those shares held by the acquirer, in this case Elon, are now reduced from a standpoint of dilution. So the takeover attempt, as I explained, is going to be much more expensive, much more difficult, going to require a whole lot more financial analysis to make sure there's actually value in doing this. Now, really quick on the flip side, the flip over poison pill, this is a different strategy. This is one of the two, allows stockholders the target of, excuse me, a flip over poison pill strategy allows stockholders of Twitter, in this case, to purchase the shares of the acquiring company at a deeply discounted price if the hostile takeover attempt is successful. So that's not what's happening here right now as far as we know, but I want to call this out to give you an idea. Assuming this was Tesla buying Twitter, I know it's not, and be clear, it is definitely not, but let's just say it was. I now could buy shares of Tesla at a discount to essentially eke out on both sides so that maybe I gain some shareholdings on Tesla's side while not worrying as much about dilution on the Twitter side. This basically causes the acquirer to avoid going ahead oftentimes because it perceives a dilution of value post-acquisition for the entire company. This is really more when a company does a hostile takeover versus Elon putting together a team to do this, okay? Some really good examples that we've seen in the past years was at Papa John's when they wanted to oust their founder, Shatner, right? And at the time, he had owned 30% of the company's stock and was the largest shareholder. So the board of directors launched a limited duration stockholder right plan, right? A poison plan. And it essentially doubled the share price for anyone who attempted to amass more than a certain percentage of the company's shares without board approval. So think about that for a second. He had 30% of the company's stock. Let's say he wanted to get up and over 50%. He wanted to take it private. He wanted to pull it away from everyone else to get it for himself, right? Now, it doesn't work anymore, right? Now he can't do that. He's going to have to pay double the price. There are other things included in this plan as well. He couldn't receive dividend distributions. As soon as he went to 31%, for example, it would have required board approvals. It would have required et cetera, right? We saw another similar case at Netflix as well. This is going back to 2012, though, that Netflix announced a poison pill from its board right after Carl Icahn acquired 10% stake. I remember this like it was yesterday. I was very heavy in the markets at the time too, and remember thinking like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a battle because Carl Icahn, of course, the takeover king, is going to do battle over at Netflix. And the new plan essentially said that anyone with acquisitions of 10% or more, I'm trying to remember it the right way. The plan stipulated essentially that with any new acquisition of 10% or more, any merger, sales, or transfer of more than 50% of the assets of Netflix allow for existing shareholders to purchase 2 shares for the price of 1. So think about that for a second, right? That's literally like a 2-for-1 deal they're running just to stop things from happening. So again, right, we talked about some disadvantages. We talked about some flip-ins. We talked about flip-outs. We talked about some examples of where this is being done. So it applies back to Twitter here, right? I think that the concern that a lot of folks are going to have coming out of this is I don't think a lot of folks are too happy with the way Twitter is going. They're facing calls for less censorship. They've got what's being seen as inefficient and ineffective leadership. I think that in many ways, we're seeing an inability to create change in the company. And when someone does try to create change, we're instantly trying to stop it from happening. But to be fair, for a second here, they did offer him a seat on the board that he turned down. So I think this is where some of this is coming from, is it went very quickly from, I'd love to see, as a joke, I want to see an edit button, et cetera, to owning 10% to suddenly saying, I don't want a board seat, and then immediately saying I'm going to buy the whole company, right? So there are some interesting things here that I think create a little bit more drama here than we normally see, right? So that's something to call out that we don't typically see in this kind of a space. This is not the way business has been done for a long time, right? Now, maybe this is better, maybe it's worse, but we don't typically see it played out publicly, so publicly, right? And that's something that I think is super, super interesting. And even Elon now was saying things like, if his initial offer doesn't work out, he has a plan B in place. And he gave a best and final, and he still has plans beyond that. But the reality is, like, for these folks, it's really feeling more like a game than it is really a strategy to derive value. I hope that that's not the case as a shareholder. And I want to just stress this at the very end of this call. It's good to ask questions about what these things are. It's good to understand why poison pills are used. More importantly than that, you are a shareholder. You have the right to vote those shares. If you're not voting those shares, you're doing yourself an injustice. My gosh, I'm tongue twisted at the end here. So that's it. Hopefully I didn't go too long here. I appreciate everybody watching. Thanks so much. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens here. So with that, have a good weekend, and thanks, everybody. Talk to you later.